health crisis has affected school students and has generated large-scale global debates on the future of education. The education landscape is changing rapidly, with a shift to increase use in technology in and out of the classroom. In the next few years, e-learning will continue to make its way into our education systems in new and diverse ways. Today, we discuss reimagining education, the future of education. Our panel tonight, we have Mrs. Michell, Acting Head of UE Open Campus St. Lucia, Ms. Michelle Charles, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Innovation and Gender Relations, Mr. Celestin Laurent, Deputy General Manager at Jannou Credit Union, and our chairperson who will steer this discussion, Mr. Don Howell, Principal of the St. Mary's College Secondary School. Mr. Howell, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
And as we begin this very critical topic in this time, I would like for you to share with our viewers your view on the purpose of education. And I want to start with you, Madam PS, Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howell, and good evening, viewers. I would like to say too that I believe education is indeed the great equalizer. It can be referred to as such because it is the single most transformative tool that anyone can acquire. It was Arthur Lewis, our Nobel laureate, who indicated that education is the great growth industry of any third world nation, and also that the cure for poverty really is knowledge and not money. And when you view education through these lenses, you would realize it speaks to self-development, and as persons develop themselves, it also impacts the development of a society. So I think this really speaks to the purpose of education. It's about developing self, growth, and of course, developing your country.
Certainly, very good commentary on your part as the head of our Ministry of Education in St. Lucia. I would also like to hear your thoughts, Ms. Michell, coming from the perspective of tertiary education from the University of the West Indies Open Campus.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I mean, in terms of the purpose of education, I think one of the things we need to do is perhaps define it just a little further, because I think what we really need to be talking about is the purpose of a 21st century education. If we think about it in some ways, I mean, for too long, education has been all about compliance and conformity of learning by rote, etc. And what is really needed if we're talking about a 21st century education is to give students the skills that they need to succeed. And of course, the skills that they need to succeed in this technology-driven society that we all inhabit. Students have so much information available to them. There is the old, we could call it 20th century mode of learning is really something that needs to be changed. And we need to focus on teaching students how to make greater sense of all of that information that's available to them. And teaching them, really the bottom line, it's really about teaching them, the transferable skills such as, communication skills, creativity, critical thinking, how to collaborate with each other. Of course, the basics, the numeracy and literacy are always there. But if we are talking about allowing our students to be able to thrive in the technology-driven society that we all now inhabit, this is what I think that we really need to do.
Okay, and we would have got the perspectives from someone involved in tertiary education, from the head of the Ministry of Education, not private sector, but involved in the corporate sector of St. Lucia. What would be, from your perspective, Mr. Laurent, the purpose of education?
Thank you, Mr. Howell. From a corporate sector perspective, our view on education is how does a young person transition from a school environment into the world of work. Far too often we find students making that transition unprepared. They may have the academic training, but they cannot function effectively in the work environment. They don't have the requisite team skills, the team building skills, the communication skills. So from our perspective, education is the tool that prepares students to transition and work effectively and productively within a work environment. So that is our view of education from an employer perspective or from the corporate sector perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. And we would have heard from the discourse, the 21st century learner, 21st century education, transferable skills, transition to the world of work, the great equalizer. So then do you think, and I would want to put that question first to Ms. Michell, do you think that the traditional way of assessment and grading, what do you think is its purpose in this current climate?
Well, there is obviously the need for assessment, for grading, but I mean, that's not an end in and of itself, okay? The purpose of assessing students is really for us to ascertain what the students know in order for your tutor, or I think these days it's less of a teacher and more of a facilitator really that we're talking about, in order for goals to be set and to ensure that the student is, really hitting the various milestones. And it's crucial in determining future teaching and learning strategies. However, of course, where it gets difficult and too often I think goes wrong is when that is confused with ranking students based on their performance. And I think we have no better example of this than, unfortunately, our very own common entrance system that is a source of a lot of heartache essentially for our students, and which do not, it does not at all allow for the kind of 21st century education that we've been speaking about, all right, and in fact has the effect of often dampening students' creativity and students, being able to, have options. Yes, very necessary, but a lot of it has to do with how the assessment and the grading is actually made use of.
All right, thank you, Ms. Michelle. But Mr. Laurent, you did in your response to the first question, you did indicate that you note a gap in the transition from school to the workplace, and what really makes a student stand out or look attractive to the employer is most time the grades or the assessment that they would have received. So give me your perspective, therefore, on the importance of grading assessment of students from the corporate perspective, and how does it impact the world of work?
Before I answer that question, Mr. Howell, let me just make one correction. In the corporate world, grades are not that important anymore. During an interview, for example, what we look for is a student, first of all, with some sort of exposure. That always weighs much higher to me as an employer. Somebody who has been exposed, somebody who is has been part of a club, somebody who is balanced, somebody who has played sports, somebody who plays music, somebody who is part of a youth development, who has been involved in society. That person, to me, always presents a better prospect for an employee. Grades are important. We value grades, but for the world of work for an employer, it's always about functionality. How easy is that person going to function and make that transformation into the world of work? Is that person affable? Is that person interactive? Is that person outgoing? That to me holds far more value than grades. Not that I'm saying grades are unimportant. So for me, it's a combination. But a person who's able to transition faster and hit the ground running, that's an ideal candidate for me.
Very, very good. So we're looking at an education system that will produce a balanced individual. So I want to then draw from this discourse and to then ask P.S. Charles, then given everything we've heard, how do you, from the Ministry of Education perspective, envisage the future of learning spaces, the future of learning experiences of our students?
And thank you for that, Mr. Howell. It's indeed a very valid point. And I would want to start by looking at the experience of our COVID-19 on our education system in St. Lucia. COVID-19, this pandemic, gave us a glimpse into what the future of education can look like. We noted that during this period, our students, there was some virtual experience and some in-class experience. So we had this kind of a hybrid of a situation which occurred. And I'm thinking that the future of education, when we envisage our learning spaces, I think of these spaces as being one that is more practical, more interactive, one that leverages technology more for instruction and learning. And maybe in the short to medium term, it might be the continuation of such a hybrid in terms of students still accessing education virtually and also within the classroom. But when I think of what the experience within the classroom is supposed to be as well, I think that within those four walls, we should be able to provide that kind of differentiated and excited kind of learning that students would want to be part of, where our facilities and resources speak to integrated devices and allow for technology to be used both within the classroom setting and also in the virtual realm. So I think this is what our future learning space is going to be like, one that embraces technology in a more wholesome manner.
I would also want to get your views, Ms. Michell, on this issue, coming from the tertiary perspective.
And of course, coming from the open campus,
Right.
where with the onset of COVID, we were perhaps one of the fortunate ones because we were, of course, prepared, to deal with it. We too had to make that transition to using virtual space even more than we did, because in addition, of course, to our degree programs, which have, for the last 10 plus years been online, we do, however, also have a suite of face-to-face courses, and we had to rapidly transition those into the virtual space. So yes, as Ms. Charles was saying, for sure, the future of learning spaces really, yes, we still have the physical space, and within that, the use of technology. But there's also, I think, and there's the value of that space, because there is so much that can be done within it. There is the effectiveness, the cost effectiveness of it. There is the manpower effectiveness. You can, stream in the best tutors from anywhere in the world, all right, to, to speak to your students right here in St. Lucia. You live streaming, experts to augment what you would normally be teaching, etc. And then there's also the issue of how people learn as well, that we need to think of when we're talking about the whole issue of learning spaces. It's not just about virtual learning spaces. It's also about the different ways in which people learn, from informal sorts of learning. The reality is that when we talk about learning spaces, people can learn just about anywhere. The technology allows us to do so much more, and but for example, I mean, one of the things that we are increasingly taking note of, and so we talk about the prior learning assessments that we're doing now, which actually speaks to this whole issue of learning spaces being, you know, wherever you happen to be and what you've learned on the ground, at your workplace, short courses you might have done. So, you know, learning spaces, you have your physical spaces, your virtual spaces, formal, informal, all right? There's so much that we have to think about, and they all come together, okay, for good, yeah, and to improve the system.
Just one thing though, and those were very thought-provoking, highlighted some of the benefits of e-learning. But I would want to hear from Mr. Laurent. In terms of adaptability to the workplace, how would an employer view someone who've learned skills online vis-a-vis a face-to-face context? What would be going through the mind of that employer?
Very interesting question. It's something that we just getting exposed to. It's a new modality, and I'm not sure that there would be a recognizable difference to somebody who has learned online or in a face-to-face setting. And I don't reckon that a student would declare that on their resume that I have an online degree, or I think a degree is enough. But it really comes to the functionality in terms of that interview, that first interaction, that first impression that the student gives. I mean, you know, when you first meet them, and you know very easily that this is the right choice. I mean, and you're able to discern that this is the person that will function well. This is the person that will be most productive. This is the person that will communicate best. And so it's never about how you got your degree. It's how you best use your degree in the world of work. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I see you're excited to respond, and that's okay.
Yes,
we can do so in 10 seconds.
Of course, I have to put in a plug. But you know, arguably, having been through the online system, what you do get is a product which is of equal value to those who are on the landed campus, but with the difference that they have been for 3-4 years, they have been exposed to, they've been using the very technology that we are saying is so important. Right. And therefore, when they come to you, I would hope that would be a plus to those who might have been, you know, less exposed to it, because they're using it for every facet of what they're doing. Great. And I think that not saying that one is better than the other, right. But certainly I think it is very useful to have students, or not students, persons, a worker coming to you who has been exposed, who is not afraid of the technology, and coming into the workplace. And these persons also tend to be very, you know, purpose-driven and very, they are self-directed in how they can work, etc. And
I will definitely keep that in mind.
Right. So before we continue our discussion, we did speak about skills and our vision for the education system and what we would like to see the future, or what our view is on the future of education. I want us to take in some commentary from Dr. Antoine from the ECCB on the issue of education.
I am deeply concerned about our obsession with subjects rather than skills. I find it difficult to accept that we could go on and on for bragging rights about who gets the most subjects in our schools and not worry about how we connect with the labor market and what these children are going to do. These students are going bright as they are when they finish school. Because what I see before me is rising unemployment, especially amongst our youth. In many of our countries, the youth unemployment rate is double the national average. So that concerns me, and for me, it is very clear that skills is an area. So you can go into some countries and you still can't find plumbers, you still can't find masons. The really good ones are in high demand, and the other ones, well, let's just not talk about that. But then you also have the issue of what is it that we're creating for this new economy? When you look at the skills required for the 21st century, there are skills in the area of emotional intelligence, the soft ones. Then there's coding and there's cognitive reasoning. And those are not skills that are being sufficiently addressed in our school system. And what is bothersome is that not only are we setting up our children for frustration, but when you look at the region, the average spend on education is actually above the average in developing countries. But the issue is really, where are we channeling those resources? The quality of the expenditure. And therefore, I would argue that we need to focus now on what it is that we're going to do. Listen, we have a chance as a region to leapfrog, to make a quantum leap in terms of our development. But it's going to have to be skills. We're going to have to change the dynamic with respect to skills. And it starts with a conversation.
And so we heard more discourse on that of skill development in the education system, and how much we should, in reimagining education and the future of it, ensure that skill development is part of it. We also know that given our current climate, we have to look at how we incorporate all of that within using the integration of technology, e-learning, to support the education system. So I want to ask PS Charles, what challenges would that pose for the Ministry of Education, from a Ministry of Education perspective, in terms of this current environment and skill development?
Thank you for that, Mr. Howell. I will say that Governor Timothy Antoine is spot on in terms of his observations and the importance of skills within our education sector. And it is pointless graduating students or learners without the requisite skills that would allow them to find placements within the job market or even to become entrepreneurs in their own right. For us at the Ministry of Education, we have recognized that, and we are embracing all of the necessary, we are taking the necessary actions towards promoting TVET, which is the technical and vocational education and training within our school system. It already happens at some of our secondary schools, but it is something that we're hoping to become more widespread. Also too, with our recently launched Human Capital Resilience Project, which it places great emphasis on TVET and qualifications for persons with skills. We see this as initiatives that are geared towards creating a more level playing field and also enhancing or promoting the importance of skills within our market, and for persons who need to qualify themselves in the areas that they have a passion for. He spoke too about having plumbers and tilers and persons with those requisite skills. And for us, it's important to qualify those persons in their areas, because this is critical. Mr. Laura spoke to, the factors that interest employers. And if our persons are going to come in with those skills and say, I'm a tiler, at least they should be proficient at some level, and our requisite qualifications should match. So for us, it's critical at the Ministry of Education, and we are promoting it for our various programs within the ministry.
Yeah, thank you, PS. And just to follow up, PS, and I would want commentary on the same issue from the tertiary perspective, but just to follow up, would the education sector be able to do everything?
Oh, not at all, because when you speak of skills, there must be some element of immersion in industry. And so there is a great role for industry, corporate society to play in all of this. So it has to be embraced at all levels.
Thank you, PS. Ms. Michell, tell us.
Yes, of course I agree with everything that PS has said. And of course, it's crucial. We often, set up this dynamic between, students who are more academically inclined and those who are more, into the vocational and technical type training. etc. But of course, there is room for all, and there is need for all. I mean, one of the things about the skill-based training is the whole issue of the transferability, about which we spoke earlier.
Yes.
And I'm so glad to hear that the ministry is working on it, because you can have your more informal type of training, like your apprenticeships, your internships, etc., where persons learn the skills literally hands-on. But hand in hand with that, what you find is also needed is that, as you stated, that you need to now regularize that and make sure that it is again, get back to the whole issue of assessment, that everything must have a certain level of certification, for example, so that you are certain that everybody is operating at the same level playing field. That if you say that you're an electrician, a level 1 electrician, there are certain skills that you will be expected to have, and those skills are skills that you would have to have wherever you go in the world. And that's, of course, where your higher level education and so starts to come in. And we need to realize that there are so many areas, so many gaps that need to be filled, and that for many of the persons who find it difficult to, and perhaps who might have been left behind in the more traditional education system, the more skill-based learning, where you can do a lot of short courses, shorter training courses, and maybe stackable credentials over time. That is an excellent way for persons who might have been left behind a bit to get back into the system.
Now, this is a very interesting discussion, and certainly the time does not permit for us to discuss everything we need to. But I would want to hear from Mr. Laurent. The emphasis is placed on skill development, the education. You heard PS indicate the initiatives of the Ministry of Education and the need for partners to be involved as well in skill development. Tell us, how would the corporate sector, specifically Jannou Credit Union, support in that regard?
Okay, two things. I want to agree with everything that has been said in terms of skill development, and the governor was very profound in his explanation in terms of the need for skill development. I want to expand it and go into the area of SME, or small and medium-sized enterprises, because too often I find that the education system develops and builds employees as opposed to employers. And I think that's an area that needs to be focused on as well. We have to train our young people to be the next Michael Chasnays and the Bill Gates and Michael Dells and what's the Facebook guy? Mark Zuckerberg, I think that's his name, right? Because we need, when you look at an education system for examination where you have 2,000 odd students sitting in the common entrance exam, and that then they transition into CXC or CAPE, and then the same 2,000 students or so leave SAFA, there are not 2,000 jobs waiting for them. There's no economy that is able to absorb that volume of students, jobs waiting. So I think that there needs to be an emphasis on employment creation as well, that we need to breed students that focus on creating their own job and becoming employers in their own rights. So and that's something that at Jannou Credit Union we provide financing for. We're very excited when we see persons coming to us with business proposals that we can engage them and guide them in terms of how they can create their own industry and become employers in their own rights. So that is the paradigm shift I would like to see as somebody involved in the corporate world. Yeah.
So in terms of the marginalized as well, we speak so much of e-learning and it doing so well. But what about those who have difficulty access to the technology that we want to incorporate so much in the education system? How could we support them? And I want to start with Mr. Laurent from the Jannou Credit Union.
A big part of Jannou Credit Union's ethos or our thrust is corporate social responsibility. At Jannou Credit Union, we are a member-based organization, and we take corporate social responsibility very seriously. A great part of our earnings or our budget is committed to providing assistance to our members, especially those in need. Our scholarship and bursary program on an annual basis provides 9 scholarships, if I'm correct, and about 10 bursaries. So every year we provide sponsorship and scholarship opportunities for those in need. We have an initiative that we just launched a couple of weeks ago called the Education Loan Package. And part of that education loan package, the persons who engage or who participate get an opportunity to win laptops and tablets. And you will remember that not too long ago, Mr. Howell, that a donation was made to the St. Mary's College of how many was it? 10 or so tablets. A collaboration between SMC and Jannou to that. So we get involved. The idea is that we get involved all the time because we understand that the need out there is great.
And I want to thank Jannou Credit Union for its support of the education system, particularly its support to St. Mary's College. This has been an interesting discussion. Certainly we must do part 2 because we have a lot of unfinished business. But I want to thank you for this discussion, and particularly I want to thank Jannou Credit Union for supporting us, supporting students, supporting education, and providing the necessary support that is needed for young entrepreneurs. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.